My sermon title this morning is Bathrooms and Eunuchs, Letting Go of the Fear of Difference. During Lent, because so many people, Christians, give up something as a part of their seasonal observance, we have been letting go of fear and different kinds of fear. And I'm going to suggest today that we let go of fear of difference. We have much of this in our culture today. Besides immigrants and foreigners and Muslims, trans people are also viewed and treated as different. We have been asked to honor this weekend as the National Weekend of Prayer for Transgender Justice. And because so much of the trans injustice centers around bathrooms, hence the title of my sermon. Now imagine living as primitive, so-called primitive people in small tribes in a forest, outdoors, or in the protection of caves. We would live in small groups and be very aware of the presence of danger and possibly death. Both would be evident either in the temporary nature of the food resources and the seasons, or perhaps the ever-present reality of disease or death. So, to survive, one had to be very wise and careful. And in such an environment, how do you know whether to trust someone who wanders into your campsite or your village? One of the ways is to look and see if they look like us. Do they resemble us? Are they some long-lost relative or just someone we haven't met yet? In that case, we can see something different and then be curious. But of course, some tribes of people didn't ask questions when they saw outsiders. They just destroyed anyone unknown or slightly different. In that case, it's see something different, fear it. For those who live in hostile wildernesses, like the nomads in the deserts during biblical times, who knew how close to the edge of survival they all were, they developed hospitality rules that made everyone safe in the wilderness. Any stranger, regardless of how different they looked, who wandered into an area had to be fed and housed, because that could be you one of these days in someone else's tribal area. This is what got Sodom and Gomorrah into trouble, according to Ezekiel 16:49. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom, the prophet says. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. The mob scene that happened violated all the rules of hospitality, big time. So the society's rules were, see something different, befriend it. After all, it could be you one of those days. The mob in that story, of course, operated out of a different value system that said, see something different, kill it or abuse it. Now, to shift the topic of gender variation, in other cultures, and I'm thinking now of some of the Native American tribes, those who identified as sexually non-conforming might be well given the title of two-spirit. This is a special honor conferred to them that made them at the level of shamans or spiritual leaders of the tribe, not in spite of their gender variation, but because of it. So for them, it is see something different, honor it. So we have choices. When we meet someone different, we can treat this as with ambivalence or curiosity or fear or even welcome and hospitality. So, why do we fear? Now, it's important to recognize that people can take advantage of us and manipulate us when we are fearful. And if they can make us afraid, we can be more easily controlled, and we might take our eyes off of other things that are happening. This is going on right now in our legislatures. For example, politicians who apparently have no conscience have tried to make Americans fearful of trans people by introducing legislation to scare us into thinking that trans people assault women and children in bathrooms, an absurd notion that has no merit and basis in reality. Right now, there are unprecedented numbers of anti-transgender bills, 44 of them at last count, being considered in 16 states. Some undercut the ability of transgender people to access gender-affirming health care, and others create state-sanctioned avenues for this discrimination. Others deny trans people access to bathrooms, locker rooms, and participating in athletic teams that are consistent with their gender identity. Others prevent transgender people from changing their birth certificates, or from legally marrying, or from accessing medically necessary care. There are 23 of those bills that target children in schools and school sports that put them at increased risk of attack and abuse. Then there are the so-called First Amendment Defense Act, FADA, bills that allow discrimination by permitting any publicly funded program to refuse service if their sincerely held religious belief is that a person's gender is determined by anatomy at the time of birth. What that has to do with religion, I have no idea, but don't get me started. So our culture says about trans people, difference, see something different, avoid it, pretend it doesn't exist, make it go away, or push them to the margins. By stirring up fear, legislators hope people will not notice that oftentimes attached to those same bills is the removal of rights and protections for all those in sexual minority communities. Our fear of sexual diversity keeps us from recognizing that the danger is not in the difference. The danger comes from those who are deliberately fanning the flames of our fears. So let's turn to the Bible. Where do we get any kinds of guidance in the Bible about our fears of difference? We do find sexual minorities in the Bible, and they are known as eunuchs. Now, in patriarchal society of Judaism, where men had all the power and women were primarily baby makers, the eunuchs were those men who were sterile and so were given special recognition and special roles to protect other men's property, that is, the women. In this case of Queen Vashti and Queen Esther, the harems were protected by eunuchs. These men served a purpose in spite of being different. So, see something different, make use of it, is how that culture handled sexual difference in that instance. What about Jesus and difference? Well, we know Jesus did not fear difference at all. All we have to do is look at this motley crew of followers that he had. They ranged in class and status, from Nicodemus and the rich young ruler, Joseph of Arimathea and Matthew the tax collector, on one side perhaps, to another group of those that society had put down, such as the lepers, the prostitutes, the women, and the despised immigrants, foreigners known as Samaritans. Then, when choosing his followers, he had Judas, the guy with the financial expertise who handled the money purse for the disciples, and Matthew, who got his paycheck from the Roman Empire, along with Martha, who owned her own home and hosted her brother Lazarus, and Mary, her sister. And then there was Simon the Zealot, who was plotting to overthrow Rome, along with a bunch of blue-collar fishermen, Peter and Andrew, and those other fishermen who fought for top dog position, James and John. He befriended the woman at the well, and he taught in synagogues with educated religious leaders. This was someone who obviously was looking at more than just the outside appearance, or perhaps he wasn't concerned with the exterior difference at all. For Jesus, see something different, avoid it? No. See something different, fear it? No. See something different, make it go away? No. See something different, nothing bad happens. See something different, maybe good things happen. Jesus had no trouble accepting difference and diversity. Now, how would Jesus act toward trans people, those who are set apart sexually? There's only one passage in Matthew 19:11 that covers something like this, and here it is. And Jesus said to them, "Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been made so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of God, of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. So Jesus offers complete acceptance of wherever those eunuchs are on their spiritual path and whatever happened to them. Now, it's a rather obscure passage to be sure, but there is one thing to note. Apparently, Jesus had no problems with eunuchs as the sexual deviants of the day, so-called. This is the appropriate time for him to have condemned them for not being male or female. He did not. No fear, no condemnation. The other passage of scripture we might want to look at is in the book of Acts, where one of Jesus' disciples, Philip, meets the Ethiopian eunuch. I'm going to assume that Philip had been with Jesus throughout his entire ministry, a number of years, and that he had watched Jesus relate to all kinds of people and had learned how to behave in this instance. And this is what he does. There were obviously signs that he was different. We don't know about the eunuch part, how he would know that, but it would be obvious that this man in the chariot was of a different class, because he's part of the queen's entourage. He was of a different race, he was Ethiopian, and he had a different sexuality. And yet, Philip climbs into the chariot and begins to explain the Jesus in light of the passage of scripture that he had. See someone different? No fear, no condemnation from Philip. Philip does not hesitate to give him the good news of the stories of Jesus he had been living and watching. See someone different? Good things can happen. They did for the Ethiopian eunuch. Because our fears are more easily manipulated when we are ignorant, as people of faith, we need to know the language of gender. We need to know the issues of these communities that are different from those of us who are cisgender. If you look in your program, you'll understand that definition. It's important to ask questions and to learn. Not only is it helpful to be curious, it keeps us from being manipulated, as is attempted to be happening now, but it also keeps people safe. Now, our children, our grandchildren may be gender fluid, non-binary. They may have their best friends fit into that category. We may have our friends who are also in gender fluid. So it's important for us not to move to fear of difference. And it's important, especially, it's imperative for us to teach our children and our young adults and one another not to be afraid of difference. But most of all, I give you another reason. It is about justice, body justice. It's about the least of these. It is about trans youth who have been kicked out of their homes and forced to live on the streets because their parents haven't got a clue how to behave or act with a child who is not the gender they're supposed to be, quote unquote. It's about trans youth having to drop out of school and work on the streets to put food in their belly because they have aged out of the foster care system and there's no stable relationship to catch them so they get their feet on solid ground of adulthood. It's about the extraordinary suicide rate. 41% of trans and gender non-conforming people will attempt suicide in their lifetime. That's compared to 1.6% of the general population who attempt so. And of course, the rates of suicide attempts climb as they have a low household income, lost a job due to bias, or were sexually assaulted. This is a population in crisis, trying to survive in a hostile culture, living on the margins of society. We dare not be ignorant of the body injustice in the trans world. We must certainly dare not let any fear of difference get in the way of working for justice for and with them. And now I give you 8 more reasons in 2017. Number 1, Sarah McElveen, A black transgender woman who worked on healthcare outreach for the homeless was stabbed to death in New Orleans in 2017. This was 2 days after another black trans woman, China Doll Dupre, was shot and killed outside a New Orleans shopping center. Misha Caldwell, a hairstylist and a makeup artist, was shot several times and found dead on a rural road near Canton, Mississippi, 2017. Jamie Lee Wounded Arrow, who was studying social work and nursing and worked as a customer service agent, was murdered in her home in South Dakota, 2017. JoJo Stryker, a black woman who was an advocate for other trans women in her community, was murdered in a garage in Toledo, Ohio, 2017. Trans woman Jacarius Holland, 18, was shot and killed during a verbal altercation in Monroe, Louisiana. Number 7, Kiki Collier, who was also known as Tierra Richmond, was in a car with a man who shot her. She died of multiple gunshot wounds in Chicago, 2017. And recently, Alfonso Watson, who went by the name of Peaches, was shot in Baltimore, Maryland. See something different? Fear it. We are on a track to outdo last year's violent rates against trans. And last year was the deadliest year on record for transgender people, with a total of 27 murders, the majority of whom are trans women of color. Trans women are almost twice as likely to experience sexual violence compared to other sexual assault survivors. And police officers are often hostile to trans women. That means that trans women are fearful to go to the law enforcement. Trans people are nearly 4 times as likely to have a yearly income below $10,000. How do you survive on that? On the margins, because they are different. See something different? Kill it. But that is not the kingdom of God. And that is not the way we treat others as we wish to be treated, as Jesus taught us. That is not the way a democracy should be operating either. Remember the hospitality rules of those who lived in the desert? See someone different? Befriend them. Remember how Jesus handled difference? See someone different? Nothing bad happens. Something good may well happen. So let's revisit and modify the scripture that we read before. And Jesus said, "Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are trans people who have been made so from birth. And there are trans people who have been made trans by others. And there are trans who have made themselves trans for the sake of who God calls them to be in the realm of God. Let everyone accept this who can," Jesus said. I understand there are times and places to be fearful, but fear based on difference is not one of them, and it's never wise. Looking at Jesus' friends and followers and his entire ministry, we can see he ignored difference altogether, doing something like moving to the margins of his society and building his ministry with those who are there. We must resist the lies of the culture and the illusion of the safety in the familiar cultural middle as it tries to squeeze us into conformity through the use of fear. If we all look and act alike, then we'll be safe, the lie says. The reality of the faith experience is that we are to move to the edge, for it is at the margins we will learn to trust in a God who embraces diversity. And we will believe in a Jesus who lived and ministered among people as all of God's children. We are to use our radical Christian vision at the realm of God on earth as it is in heaven, where we're all one, united in love and compassion for one another, woven together just as surely as Jesus and God are one. God calls us to move to the edge, to move to the margins, to those who have been pushed there, by ignorance and fear. Away from all those ways we think we have of keeping ourselves safe. For at the edge, we learn to rely instead on the one who is always calling us toward love, toward justice, toward righteousness, and certainly towards those who are different from ourselves. Our faith challenge is to move to the edge where God is found. I choose today to end with one of my favorite poems that reflects this movement of faith to the margins. Come to the edge, God says. We're afraid, they said. Come to the edge, God says. They came, God pushed, they flew. May we fly on our faith journey as we have given up our fears of difference. Amen.